Good morning, Crystal. Okay, now I turned on my speakers. Let's try that again. Good morning, Crystal. Can you hear me? Yeah, my microphone's working. Okay, can you hear me, Crystal?
I can barely hear you.
Okay, let's let me rearrange things here. Can you hear me better now? Okay, how about now? Can you hear me now? I don't know what's going with my microphone here. All of a sudden, there appears no working sound. Um, okay, are you getting any sound at all?
Yeah,
Can
I
you
have.
hear me now?
I can't hear you now.
Good. And let's go on from here. So let's see. What let's go back up here. Like to just quickly review.
I can't hear you.
You can't hear me.
I can now, but
Okay.
you keep going away.
Okay. Let me do it this way then. All right. Is that better now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Let's let's try and keep it that way. So this week's we're looking at several topics. You saw the video from Tuesday, so
Yes.
that's good. And so we're going to move on and look at the other three chapters for this week. There are only the 5 chapters for this week, so not quite as much information to be gone through. But these chapters have a fair bit of information in them, so let's go ahead and get started. How's your mother-in-law, by the way?
She's doing okay. They still haven't taken her foot. They're going and seeing another specialist. So
Good. If they can find a way not to have to take it, that would be better for her.
it would, but her skin and tissue is so broke down that she has a spongy foot.
Oh,
So in my personal opinion, I think it would be better if they would take it and she get a prosthetic and maybe be able to walk around with that.
yeah.
Because as of right now, I had to buy her a knee scooter so she can get around because she can't put any weight on that foot.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine it's pretty painful.
Yeah,
Well, that's a shame. Perhaps she'll take the cue and take a little better care of herself.
I hope so. I pray.
Yeah, no kidding. It's hard to deal with it when the family members are not doing that. So
Yeah.
anyway, let's just go into part 3 here, which is costs and choices that we get to make. And we're going to look now at the process of owning versus leasing equipment. Owning means to buy it, which means you are responsible for all aspects of it. You're responsible for maintenance. You're responsible for costs of operation. Everything that's associated with that is your cost. We'll talk about other aspects of that in a bit, whereas leasing can be a couple of things. They use the term financial leases and operating leases, and we'll see how those are identified. Financial leases are lease purchase. Actually, it's a contract of purchase. And so it has to be shown on the books as a purchase, and then all of the corresponding accounting rules for that, including depreciation and so forth, apply to that. Whereas, and the criteria here, a lot of times you can buy the asset at the end of the term for a lower price because they've been getting money all along, of course. And the transfer to the lease owner takes, or the lessee, meaning your organization, takes ownership before the expiration of the lease. Often that lease will last for a significant value of the significant portion of the lifetime of the estimated lifetime of the asset, typically 75%, but it could be longer. And remember, we went through present value calculations last year, so the present value of that lease is at least 90% of the actual value. So you have a salvage value at the end of the time, which you can then presumably sell this equipment for that salvage value and realize that income back. Operating leases, on the other hand, are just a yearly expense. They're a periodic expense to the company, and it's current, so there's no capitalization because you don't own the equipment. It's just a cost of doing business. The payment on that is current, so even if you're using accrual accounting, that payment becomes an operating expense, a current cost under the accrual rules. So you have to make a decision on buy or lease in these things. You look at an analysis, and in fact, part of the decision making is to actually do that analysis on the two options, buy it or lease it, which is going to require you to make some assumptions, but you've already made those assumptions when you have been justifying acquiring this equipment one way or the other anyway. And those assumptions would include things like, what is the cost? What is the cash flow you can expect from it? You've done already somewhat of an internal rate of return calculations. So you have a lot of those in place, and those assumptions need to be a part of the analysis. They need to be consistent with your justification. So some decisions that you have are, if you're going to buy it, are you going to borrow that money? When you borrow money, you are adding to your cost because, of course, you pay interest on it. Or do you have the ability to service that purchase out of your operating cash flows? And again, recognizing that you are making assumptions. So you need to build in to those assumptions enough leeway that you are confident that you're going to be able to have the operating cash flows to pay for it. There often is a service contract when you buy something. You have a service contract that's associated with it, and that costs more money. Seldom does that actually get included in the equipment. There's probably a warranty period. Usually we're looking at a year for most large equipment. Sometimes it's a little bit more. Smaller equipment, often it's less time. But then you have, so you have that service, that installation service is one thing, but ongoing, because all equipment has the possibility of experiencing problems, and you're going to have it serviced. So you need to include that and take a look at any of the comparative contracts you've looked at to be sure that when you are looking at the contracts are consistent. In other words, does each contract include the service contract costs, or is one of them, and I've seen this happen before, you get several options and some of them include all of these costs and some of them do not. So you want to be sure that you're always comparing like to like. The organization structure is important as well. In a for-profit organization, obviously the company is paying a tax on their profits. A not-for-profit operation, taxes are not a consideration. So that things like depreciation allowances and those kinds of considerations are different. You don't care about depreciation because that's really a strategy and a common method of reducing taxes. If you're not paying taxes, it's irrelevant. So so when you're doing that, we look at assumptions about our depreciation. Depreciation isn't a cash item. Deductible on the for-profit is a non-cash item deductible on the tax return. So this deduction can give a tax savings. And again, as I said before, not-for-profits are not subject to taxes, so there's no tax saving. So let's take a look at Chapter 21. And we'll page down here to table, let's see, obviously I need my glasses for this. All right.
So like the comparative analysis and presented, so like the for-profit and the non-for-profit, is that kind of like where, for instance, at the port, we have some non-profit choir groups that come through and they don't have to have the permits and stuff like that. Is that because they applied for that and are able to have that what do you call it, that exemption? Or
yeah,
like, what constitutes them as not being able to skip and pay those or pay the taxes or pay?
right. Well, the designations for things like not-for-profit and for-profit, those are tax code things, and it has to do with the way the organization is structured. The real difference between the two, and the short explanation of the difference between not-for-profit and for-profit operations is that in a for-profit situation, some or potentially even all, in some cases, the profits are distributed to the shareholders. In a not-for-profit, those profits, and it's not that they can't make profit, they can. There are some limitations on how much they can make, but they, as a percentage of their net worth and that sort of thing. But they reinvest that money back into the organization. And so the benefits of having a not-for-profit designation through the IRS is that most states and other organizations will give certain benefits to these. As it used to be that they were most of them were charitable organizations or doing public work in a private setting. So the states would give exemptions to some of the fees and costs, not all of them for sure, but some of them. So that, I'm sure that's what's going on with the choir groups that come through. Most of those are organized as not-for-profit entities, simply because it's not that it's that much simpler to do all of your annual reporting, but you don't have to be preparing required profit and loss reports and everything to all of your shareholders. So I'm sure that's part of it, and almost all states will waive certain fees, and any federal property will waive those fees for most nonprofits. So does that help?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So if we take a look at this table here, and I've got the first page of it up, I think this is being shared, right? You can see.
Yes.
Okay. So in the example that's given, the cost of the device was $50,000. And the salvage value at the end of year 5 is $5,000. That reflects that 90% present value of the device. Let's see. Let's go down here. So the depreciation expense is since the present value of the equipment was $50,000, the depreciation in the first year, if we figure the present value is 90%, the depreciation in that first year is $5,000 right off the top. And if we look at the yearly depreciation afterwards, it's a straight line depreciation. In other words, $10,000 a year. So that's how they've constructed this. The estimated tax expense is strictly dependent on the tax bracket the organization is in. Considering that corporate taxes have recently been significantly slashed, I wonder if that's actually affecting this kind of business. That's an aside. So if we'll be coming back to this later. So I'm going to go back to the slides. Okay. So we're going to look at two things in this chapter, which is going to be the Northside Clinic, which is a for-profit entity, and the South Side, which is a not-for-profit. And so that we're going to look at comparative analyses for the net cash flow of owning and leasing, comparison, and then the present value cost of owning and leasing. So if we just page down, we're going to look at these tables now. So I'll go to that again. Let's see. All right. So we're looking here at Northside, looking at its comparative cash flow for the cost of ownership and the cost of leasing. If we look at these numbers, and we'll go back to the slides in a minute and take a look at those. They've set it up for owning, comparative cash flow for owning here. So we have an equipment purchase price of $50,000. We have the tax savings from the depreciation expense. Remember, depreciation is a non-cash item. So, and at the end, we're showing the salvage value, which is the 10%. So in the first year, we've paid out $50,000, and the savings has been $1,250. So the net cash flow that first year is 48 is a minus 48,750. And so this is obviously not including any income that comes from using the equipment. That's another factor that you put into your calculations, is if this is being bought so that we can generate revenue, then those revenues need to go in as well. And it just adds another line to the analysis. So each year then there's a $25, because of the depreciation, we've already seen that there's a $2,500 net cash from each one. And at year 5 now, we have a $5,000 salvage fee that we can theoretically gain. So so that's our net cash flow each year on this. So obviously this is expense. As I say, we've not included any potential income that comes because of the use of the equipment. If we look at leasing, the lease payments, if we do again, now note, lease payments are going to be more each year than we actually pay for, than we'd actually be using as the depreciation. So these are costs. So in our first year, our actual cost is $11,000, and that's the expense. So the tax savings then is calculated here at $2,750. So our net cash flow each year now is a loss of $8,250. Okay, so do these tables make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back now to the
It looks like owning is better because you could have that 5-year salvage value versus leasing. You're going to owe more than it was even worth at the end.
Yeah, that's part of your calculation. That's why I say part of this is just looking at the cash flow without looking at revenue, because equipment doesn't always directly generate revenue. It may be
right.
Overhead, but it could be necessary. I mean, a new heating system, for instance, doesn't generate revenue, but it does keep you in business.
Right.
So if we take a look now at going down here, and we'll go back and look at the present value tables now as well. I just want to do a quick look at those. And let's go back here. It's a pain in the neck to have to go back and forth, but that's okay. Okay. So we come down here and we look at, whoops. cost of owning versus we're going to look at Southside Clinic. So we have actually here, if we look at the cost of owning, the comparative cash flows here for Southside Clinic, again, they if they buy it, they've got a $50,000 net expense in the first year, and in year 5 they're getting nothing. There's no tax savings. This is really looking at the tax savings again. They're getting nothing. So at the end of the time, they've spent $50,000, and they can possibly get $5,000 back. Whereas if they lease it again, they're looking at leasing. They're looking at paying out this $11,000 per annum for leasing the equipment. There's no salvage value, so it's just a cost straight across the board. If we do the comparisons here, let's look at the Northside Clinic. We've looked at, and now we're going to be looking at the present value comparison. And we do this with our net present value of our cash flows. And this is where we have we want to look at the real and involving the time cost of money. So here we've done using a discount rate of 8%. We're looking at it. We calculate a present value, and we do this in Excel, so we won't go through the process. But the present value cost of owning the equipment is $37,064. On leasing, now we go back and take a look at these cash flows, and again using an 8%, we calculate actually a present value that is less by about $1,400 and some odd dollars. So the comparison here is we looked at these two. The differential is $1,400 and some odd dollars. Is that significant? That depends on your organization. But it is another data point. So this says that since our present value here of the investment is lower, that probably leasing would be the way I'd want to go. Now, if we go through the same set of calculations for the cost of owning and leasing for the Southside Clinic. Remember, it's not a we're looking at the present value. Excuse me. Remember, it's a not-for-profit. So here we've got a $50,000 expense with a $5,000 recovery at year 5. And we have doing our present value calculations again at 8%. To the Southside Clinic, the present value of owning is $46,595. Whereas if we go through the same factor on leasing, again, the same types of cash flows and numbers, again, we're looking at $47,271, which is about, let's see, 405, $676 difference here. This may be irrelevant, and it may be easier to fund our operations each year out of our operating cash flows here, and not worry about a $600 difference between the two. So there's yes, go ahead.
Isn't this where you would also compare of, okay, how much does it cost to keep maintenance on the vehicle? You know, does the maintenance include in the leasing versus owning? And
yeah, and that's when you're leasing it, usually the contract is going to include the responsibility of the the leasing party, the party that's actually offering the lease, usually their contract includes their maintenance, and so that could be why we're seeing instead of $10,000 a year, 11,000 here. That may be the additional cost for maintenance and service on the equipment. But yeah, you do have to include that. That's why it's important when you look at these contracts to be certain that you're always looking the same. You're always looking at the same parameters, because you don't want an unexpected bill to come in that wasn't discussed and wasn't in the contract, and find out that you have to have then something else. So it, but these are the kinds of the comparative cash flow information that we actually do for these things. We take a look at what's the advantage, what's even more important, the disadvantage. Okay, so we've compared those. So if we look at that, this is a summary. Here we go. The net advantage to leasing then is that you have is $1,489 for the Northside Clinic, the for-profit organization, from our present value cost. Note that we do have to go through that first set of comparisons, which are the comparisons of cash flows, in order to do the present value calculation. They're both important. So here we have the advantage to leasing is $1,469, whereas in the not-for-profit example, Southside Clinic, that advantage is $676. That might be regarded as not relevant. Remember, this is $676 over 5 years, which isn't a whole lot of money per year. So it may be viewed as so small as to be irrelevant. So that makes your decision then a case of looking at your ability to generate the cash that is needed to finance the equipment either outright or to lease it. So, so we're not gonna do that practice exercise. I'm not gonna worry about any of these as well. But if we look at the exercise 21.1 in the chapter, we're looking at a comparative present value for at two different discount rates. So the effective discount rate is chosen. And remember, the discount rate is what we think we should be able to get if we just invested the money in some sort of interest-bearing vehicle. So 10% is rather high, but there's another part that financial analysts like to do, is that there's always a risk that you've made, that's not going to get the revenue that you think. And so what a financial analyst would do, and I've done a lot of these kinds of analyses on contracts I've negotiated. What they'll do is increase that discount rate to make up for the risk that somewhere in your assumption set you have made a mistake. And it's usually what you're trying to do is since you're trying to predict the revenue from some sort of piece of equipment like this, then what if you underestimate that revenue? And there's lots of reasons that this can happen. And most of us who actually do this kind of forecasting will deliberately keep our revenues at a defensible minimum, what I call a defensible minimum. In other words, if someone says to you, well, that looks like an awfully small revenue flow from this piece of equipment, I've often just said, well, we hope it'll be higher, but in order to really present a good picture here, I was very conservative about the revenues. Almost no one will argue when you're being conservative about revenues, because you know, if you're if that means that you've done some careful analysis. I've been through that a few times. So anywhere here, but the effective discount rate is pretty big here in this particular problem. The difference between owning and leasing is $3,319, which is probably something that would be considered significant. But if we look at a 6% discount rate, the differential is irrelevant. $488 over 5 years, less than $100 a year. Okay, does that make some sense?
Yes.
Okay, so that's chapter 21.
Okay.
All right. So let's get rid of that and open 22. And this is about strategic planning. So we're going to spend some time on this. And so I want to go over here and actually open up the next chapter. Okay. So can you see chapter 22 there now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to increase that to a readable size. So we're going to be looking at the components of strategic planning, to look at something that is the topic of this week's discussion, which is mission, vision, value statements, and how they play into a strategic plan. The cycle that is going to actually vary depending on what organization you're in. And then in government, has a lot of requirements about planning because of the government budget cycles and that sort of thing. And then we'll look at what we call SWOT analysis, the situation, we'll get into what that is in a bit, and then look at a financial forecast and a financial projection. Okay, so we'll get into that in this chapter. And what I'm going to do now is go back to this. Okay. That's a pretty obvious statement. Strategic planning is vital. There are going to be multiple approaches. There's all sorts of, as in everything else, there are all sorts of components. If we look at a figure taken right out of the chapter, this comes out of a lot of texts on strategic planning. There are all sorts of things that go into consideration here, including the mission and vision statements. The values get played in, and we have to establish goals and objectives. Goals are really high-level sort of things. We want to be a leader in, to provide the best possible service, whatever. Objectives are the specific the specific components of that that are going to make it possible to reach the goals. The action plans are the tactics by which you are going to achieve those objectives. And then all of that has to be consistent with your mission and vision statements, and they have to conform to your values. So we'll get into what all of those things are. Mission statement is, why do you exist? And what you're doing right now. Our mission statement at a long-term care facility may be to deliver the highest level of care to our clients at affordable prices, and working within the medical system to constantly improve. There's a number of mission statements out there. You'll see that when you're doing your research for your excuse me, for your discussion post this week. You'll see that see some examples. Mission statements can be fairly short. They can be long, but they're not real long. If you can't put it in half a page, it's too long. Sometimes people will have only a few lines. A vision is what we want to be in the future. Where are we going? Are we going to become, the leading provider of long-term care services in southern Wyoming? That sort of thing. That tells us that. The values express the philosophy and really, in many ways, the moral basis for why the company exists. All of these things have to be consistent. If you have a mission that you're going to, make widgets for the medical equipment, and then your vision is that you're going to be a care provider, those are not consistent. And if your organizational values don't address how the vision of the company is going to be achieved, and how we're going to operate on a daily basis, the mission, then they're not consistent. So those all have to be consistent. And then our goals is really what are our specific mission and vision statements are often kind of squishy. So our goals are really concrete, measurable, and so those are the goals from there. The objectives, again, I'm not sure why this slide has both things here, but I'm going to change it a little bit. The objectives define what we have to do to achieve a goal. They also have to include measurable components. How can we actually see that we are making progress toward that goal? So there has to be a component of measurability in there as well. The planning and the purpose of that is going to depend on our organization. We're going to look at, to some extent, at government. Strategic planning is good for any organization. Governmental organizations actually have a legislated requirement for those things. So you don't have to have a strategic plan in your organization. It's a good idea, always, but we have to look at it. So and one thing about strategic plans is that most organizations that go through strategic planning will have a plan for the whole organization, and then each department or unit of the organization will have its own strategic plan. And that strategic plan for each of those operating units must be directly must directly come from the overall organization strategic plan. Otherwise, you've got people going in 12 different directions. So we have different ways of looking at these things. So let's go back and look at some examples of these kinds of statements. The mission and vision and value statements can vary, and they can focus on whatever is important to the organization. So we have some examples, and I'm going to switch back over to the chapter now. Okay. So we looked at that. So a mission statement basically tells us what we are now. Oops, went too far. Vision is what we want to be in a time frame. It can be as much as 10 years. It can be a lot longer than that amount of time as well. But generally speaking, it's over the next number of years. And a vision is the philosophy. There is a lot to be said about the vision, but it's something that you need to be looking at as a shared view of the world that you expect to see from your employees as well as your managers. Goals and objectives and action plans. Goals are, they're outlined in your strategic plan. It is what has to be done. You may have a goal in your long-term care facility of averaging 90% occupancy. Something that's not hard to do these days since there's a waiting list in every organization. But you may have that as your goal. You can measure that. I mean, if you've reached the goal and you're at 90%, you may have a higher goal. You may want to, if you're in a rehab situation, your goal may be to have the best, to support say 20 beds in a rehab facility, and have the infrastructure to actually do the rehab, the physical, occupational, and speech therapy capacities that you have. The objective, as I said before, looks at outcomes that are needed to achieve the goal. They have to be measurable. They tie directly into a specific goal. And usually you're going to have multiple objectives. Action plans basically is your tactical plan for how you're going to achieve it. There are all sorts of things all sorts of other words that are used, but an action plan, I think, is a good term. It's an active term. It means that you're going to be doing something. In terms of mission and vision statements, let's take a look at a few of them. One of this, we're going to focus on this. Obviously, our text focuses on health, so we're going to be looking at a nonprofit here, this Sutter Help. The mission here, we enhance the well-being of people in the communities we serve through not-for-profit commitment to compassion and excellence in healthcare services. Note this is kind of a squishy statement, and it is really kind of general, and often these things are, because what you don't want your mission statement other things. The vision, health leads the transformation of healthcare to achieve the highest levels of quality across access and affordability. Well, we don't have this. Remember, this is looking into the future. This, to me, this one sounds a bit like about a very similar sort of thing. And that may be typical of a not-for-profit. Values. So note that these are just words. And I don't mean that they should be ignored because they're just words. But we don't need to have a long narrative here. In fact, this is actually a bit long. There's 7 of them. Most people in the strategic planning world tell you that you shouldn't have more than about 5 because it's hard for your employees to be able to memorize and live by this list. And when we put in too many, we're going to be overlapping in many cases. So values, excellence and quality, innovation, affordability, teamwork, compassion and caring, unity, honesty and integrity. Note here they say that when they arrange these in a circular graphic, this last one, honesty, integrity, is in the middle of the circle. But really, the ones that you're going to see most often in a long-term care facility are going to be compassion and caring, and excellence and quality of our service. You'll see a few others as well, and teamwork will be a part of it because really long-term care is a teamwork effort. Let's take a look at the next one down here, which is a for-profit. We're not going to go through all these. You can read quickly through those. Tenet Healthcare Corporation, a publicly held company that's listed on the stock exchange. So this is, again, this is a subset of a for-profit in that it's publicly held. In other words, that stock is widely distributed through sales to anyone and everyone who wants to buy them, as opposed to much more closely held for-profit that may be family owned. A good example of something that's a for-profit entity that's not publicly traded is the company I used to work for. They eventually did become public, but for many years it was the only major pharmaceutical company in the world that was not publicly traded. It was closely held by a charitable foundation, and so it was a very different entity. And as a result, our attitude toward profit was somewhat different. So anyway, Tenet here is looking at its fact that it is a for-profit, meaning that, and publicly traded, meaning that it distributes part of its profits as a dividend to its shareholders each year. So here, the mission statement, at Tenet, our business is healthcare. Well, that defines really where they are. But healthcare itself is a broad term, so it gives them lots of room. Our mission is to improve the quality of life of every patient who enters our doors. So they are a provider of healthcare as opposed to a pharmaceutical company, say. Our approach makes us unique and delivers and defines our future. That's, again, kind of a squishy statement, gives you lots of room. The values, note that there's no vision statement here, but the values, at least not yet, and not that they're putting here. As we seek to improve the quality of our patients' lives, to serve our community, to provide an exceptional environment for our employees and affiliated physicians, and provide an attractive return to our shareholders, we are guided by 5 core values. Note that these are not listed, but we'll just leave that go for now. So the now we're going to take on a government with a hospital taxing district status, tax supported hospital in Dallas. As such, it first states its mandate from the taxpayers. There's a mandate here to furnish medical aid. This is why they're formed. The mission is dedicated to the health and well-being of individuals and communities entrusted to our care. Note the word entrusted. This implies something about where their values are, in my opinion. The vision, we will define the standards of excellence for public academic health systems. Now, this again is kind of an open-ended statement. It doesn't say in 5 years we want to be but it does imply a lot about what their principles are. Guiding principles are the same thing as values. Our values and principles reflect shared responsibility to achieve healthcare excellence for our patients and communities. So we have a very short list of these. What have I got here? Okay, let's take a look at what Mayo said. We all know about the Mayo Clinic. It's a nonprofit organization that is well known with locations in several places around the country. The mission to inspire hope and contribute to health and well-being by providing the best care to every patient through integrated clinical practice, education, and research. Here, they're very well defined: integrated clinical practice, education, and research. And note the term best care right there, every patient. So they're really stating some of they're implying a lot as to what their core values are going to be. Primary value, needs of the patient come first. This is an interesting one because a lot of places won't have a primary value. And the value statements, the values inside Mayo's Clinic to this day are an expression of the vision and intent of our founder, the original Mayo Physicians, the Sisters of St. Francis. So, we have a variety of these kinds of things. I urge you to go through and read some of these things. Get yourself familiar, because if you're asked to prepare a mission statement, you need to have some idea as to what they are, and it's and understand that they can vary all over the place. Some of them, as I say, can get wordy. I've seen that in a lot of cases, and some of them can be very, very focused. So let's go back to the slides. Okay, I'm not going to look at too many of these. We can look at, and now this is all on their based on their focus. Now there are financial emphases, and looking at like a foundation or a practice network here. Let's go back to the, this was St. Barnabas and Texas Oncology. So let's go back to here. And the financial responsibility here of a foundation, St. Barnabas Medical Center Foundation. Foundations are usually structured as not-for-profit. Often work with, in this case with St. Barnabas, we're looking at receiving charitable gifts. In order to receive charitable gifts and allow the giftors to use that as a deduction on their taxes, they have to be a not-for-profit. organization. So their mission is now somewhat more wordy. Part of the Medical Center Foundation, charitable organization, philanthropic support for the programs and services of St. Barnabas Medical Center. Okay, so this is a vehicle for funding the operations of medical centers in New Jersey. These programs provide communities who serve the highest quality, most compassionate care. To accomplish our mission, the foundation will ensure that charitable gifts are used effectively and directed by the donor. That's an important thing to remember. The donor gives money for a specific purpose. The foundation must use it only for that purpose, or it's actually a violation of the tax code, and they can get into severe trouble. I one time was on the board of a not-for-profit school, and we had to really go after the school director for misappropriating funds that were given for very specific purposes. And we had to redirect those funds quickly in order not to get into trouble. So that'll happen. And then carefully manage the endowed funds entrusted to us. Okay. So this is a financial kind of thing. Now here, if we look at a medical practice, in this particular one, this Texas Oncology is serving oncology patients throughout the state of Texas through a network of physicians, and places an unusual way. It places vision first and mission second. There's nothing sacred about the order, by the way, considering that they all have to be consistent. If we look at the vision, to be the first choice for cancer care, that is something that is a good vision statement because it does look into the future. To be the first choice. Obviously, at this point, they're working toward that. The mission now becomes a little bit, again, wordier than we've seen, to provide excellent evidence-based care for each patient we serve while advancing cancer care for tomorrow. The mission statement could end right here, okay? But they include their values. Texas Oncology has 3 core values consisting of patient care, culture, and business. The business core value is of particular interest to us here at this book is writing. Our practice values professional management that promotes convenient access at rural and urban sites, provides leadership and efficient care and delivery, and improves all aspects of care, provides financial structure to expand services to our patients, and is competitive in all aspects of the business. So these values here are really are being stated in a way that fits back into the mission and the vision. If they can provide all that, they may very well become the first choice for cancer care. So they have they have to have the financial structure to succeed. So their mission and vision are slightly different here, and slightly more complicated, but it gives you a good example of where these things can go. So we'll go on now. We've looked at some of those. The mission, they can vary in terms of the way they introduce it, the way they express it. They can have a motto and make it available for people to see. Remember that mission is what we want people to understand we do. Vision is where we want people to know we're going. And our value statements gives them a reason to want to do business with us because they perceive us as providing services and providing those services honestly and fitting within a set of our own values. People will give business to organizations that have their values. And we see this a lot these days when we see things like investment funds that are working in sustainable fields and in environmentally friendly and so forth. So we see these a lot, and people will put their money where their beliefs are, assuming that they can afford to do so. So we're not going to go through a lot of this. We'll look at a few things here. Often our message will have a title. Let's go back to the chapter. Okay. And here I'm not going to mess around too much with Aetna Insurance. The company does have its title, the Aetna Way. But let's take a look at the AMA, the American Medical Association, which is their message is going to emphasize areas of focus. According to its website, the AMA is the largest physician organization in the nation. It provides a variety of resources and support for its members. The AMA had a 5-year strategic plan which aimed to ensure the enhancement of healthcare in the United States are physician-led. Obviously, this is an organization that's set up to support its members. And this is one of the things about an organization like the AMA or the American Chemical Society, which I'm a lot more familiar with, or any other professional organization. Their goal is to advance the ability of their membership to do their jobs and to have careers and so forth. But their strategic plan talks about improving outcomes, accelerating change in medical education, and in keeping the physicians happy with their practice. Because many physicians, there's a lot of physicians that have trouble with their practice, especially financially these days. So, and they post it electronically so that an AMA member could pick on it. And could pick it up and provide feedback before they released it out to the general public. We look at the Good Samaritan Society, largest nonprofit provider of senior care services in the U.S. The paragraph that precedes the strategic plan statements explains the purpose of the terms. Our mission states why the society exists. Our vision defines the desired outcome of our work. Our direction defines where we want to go, where we want to be as an organization, and our hallmark values. Now again, values can also be considered a moral code or an ethical code, whatever you want to make it. But our hallmark values and related core principles identify the values we strive. So there's lots of ways of doing that. Mottos are oops, let's back up here. And if they're an effective way, but it's very, very difficult to construct a good motto. 6-word motto from the Good Samaritan Society: grounded in mission, centered in values. So we've got 6 words. And the value of a motto is it always has to be short. I mean, literally, we talk about sound bites a lot, but it really is something that's short, to the point, and understandable, grounded in mission, centered in values. Now, you might say, what does that mean? But at least it's easy to understand. If we look down here at the Providence Healthcare Network, is there, and it's part of a large nonprofit health system, Catholic health system. A mission of compassion. Compassion is perfected by excellence. So that's there. And then it goes on, because excellence goes beyond the will to help others by providing determination and tools to succeed where the heart takes you. That's getting a bit wordy, but there's some interesting stuff to it. You come away with the impression that they really want to deliver good, compassionate care as part of their as part of what they're doing. I'd like to. There's some you can download these things a lot of times and read them. I'm very familiar with Duke Medicine and its various components. The School of Medicine, the School of Nursing, and so forth. Because we lived in Durham, North Carolina for 15 years. Within a stone's throw of Duke Hospital, and our physician practice also ultimately was bought by the Duke University Health System. So you can get all these things, and they put out these great big booklets, and you can download them, but you can read these summaries of what the strategic plan, what the vision, what the mission, and what these organizations are capable of doing. Clearly, with something as big as Duke Medicine, and it's very, very big, there's going to be a lot more information than something smaller. I won't go into Johns Hopkins. There's all sorts of things that they will put out that you can get and acquire. Johns Hopkins is one of the, again, a leading medical school, and in some cases, the leading medical school in certain aspects on the East Coast. So let's go back now here. So we've looked at our terms and our motto. And we can get these things from off the internet. So let's quickly look at the flow of functions, of the flow of activity that leads to structuring a strategic plan. Won't spend a lot of time on that, because strategic planning is a unique process in every organization. But basically, you're going to have in order to write a strategic plan, which is a written document. It's not just a few statements. It is a written document that can be running from anywhere from a few pages for a small organization with a limited scope of activity to 1,000 pages in a very large organization. So first off, we need to know what our goals are, and then our objectives within those goals, and then we need to look at action plans. So we have that we're going to achieve these. So a goal gets divided into objectives, which gets divided into various action plans for achieving those objectives. Everything needs to really be aimed at what those strategic goals are. And as I said before, they have to fit into mission, vision, and values. Okay, so then our action plans must look at performance measures. And so we have to, all of that goes in. How long does this take? Most of the time, companies, especially larger organizations, will look at a strategic planning cycle. You don't just write it, put it on the shelf, and then go about your business. It's something that you take a look at fairly often and review it, usually annually. The organization that I worked in for a long time, the pharmaceutical company, the strategic planning cycle is such that every year the main board in London would really look at the strategic plan and make sure that not only the plan still made sense and was appropriate, because medicine changes rapidly, but that we are willing to look at modifying it to take advantage of changes and perhaps re-examine company business. Originally, the company had a number of different divisions. We had an agricultural chemical division, we had an animal health division, and ultimately the company decided strategically that those were not a good fit with our core business, which was human health, and we sold them off. So this is an example of how we look repeatedly at strategic plans to see if they need to be changed. But always, the first thing to do is be sure that it fits with the mission. And if our mission changes, that's fine. We can change the mission of the company. But we don't make, complete reversals or 90-degree right turns overnight. It's something that has to be planned and looked at. The vision, where you're going, changes. I mean, when we started divesting ourselves of our animal health division and we had an environmental health division that sold things like, paper towels and hand sanitizers and all sorts of products for use in offices to maintain a clean environment. That turned out to be something that did not meet the financial needs of the company. We sold that off to another organization that was in that business. So again, it was a case of looking at these and making the decisions, changing the mission when necessary, changing the vision of where you want to be, but never changing the values. Okay? The planning cycle, I mean, there are lots of steps. Take a quick look. 3 management areas that are generally done: planning, decision making, and providing accountability. I'm not going to go through federal agency stuff here because I've already mentioned that according to federal law, federal agencies have to provide plans, and that's for budgeting and strategic planning purposes. Currently, we seem to have a lot of chaos in our government agencies, so I don't know how that fits into their strategic plans because they seem to change every week. So, but the agencies have to have a mission statement and goals and describe how they are, and then they have to look at what external factors might significantly affect them. And of course, for a governmental agency, legislative changes. The whole debate around the Health Care Act is a good example. Talk about throwing people into chaos when they didn't know what was going to happen next. Time frames are usually fixed by law, and then I'm just not going to go into this too much. I'm not here with the VA. I'm having to do too much with the VA these days. I don't even like to think about them. But these things, this planning cycle is a governmental issue that I'm going to just quickly run through here. So the management responsibilities are upper level, meaning top, mid-level responsibilities, and managerial level responsibilities. When you go into working in a long-term care facility, your level will probably start with a departmental or managerial level responsibility, as opposed to mid or senior. And sometimes there is only the managerial and the upper in those organizations. So the managerial develops all of the plans to align with what are set goals that are set by the mid-level. Because, as I said, every department has to fit into those efforts. So you will be required to develop these plans to actually meet those goals as are defined elsewhere. Various tools. We look at a situational analysis to look for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's what SWOT analysis is. And we look at those. We want to know where our strengths are and what we need to strengthen our weaknesses. We need to be looking at the opportunities. What's going on out in the wider environment that can provide us opportunities to expand our business or to consolidate. And threats. What are the things? One of the biggest threats, of course, in the medical field is whatever it is that Congress might do to us. So we look at this. The strengths and weaknesses are an internal analysis, and our threats and opportunities are external. Theoretically, as a manager, you're going to be monitoring your internal strengths and weaknesses continuously. Because when you see a weakness developing, you don't want it to turn into something that's going to be a major problem. What you want to do is begin to identify ways of strengthening it when you see it. Opportunities and threats are external. Again, it means monitoring what's going on. Are there going to be major construction projects in the neighborhood around your facility? I've seen this when I've been looking in Maryland for a place for my father, seeing a brand new facility that had been put on essentially a greenfield site outside of a town, suddenly now surrounded by houses. And a lot of times long-term care facilities are not welcomed by their neighbors. So then you have so the opportunity, the threat here externally is that there'll be some resistance from your neighbors. The opportunity here is then how do we go out and we make friends with our neighbors and show that we're good neighbors and not a problem for them to have to deal with. So there's worksheets for this. And by the way, strategic planning also, there's all sorts of software available to do this. Okay, so financial projections and forecasts. Projections, forecasts are based on assumptions that are expected to exist and that reflect actions that are expected to occur. Projections are a little bit different in that they often are based on the past, instead of looking at assumptions as to what may be expected to occur. And they are much less precise and accurate, and often we need to say, well, what if, for instance, what if the provisions of the Affordable Health Care Act ultimately end up being declared unconstitutional what's that going to do to our financial position? And that's where these projections come in. So there's a lot of steps here that you can look at. You can, by the way, download all these chapters if you haven't already from the, if you go back to Course Home and the ebook, you can download each of these chapters so that in the future, if you need to refer to them, you can. I suggest you think about that. So so that's basically where we are with that particular chapter. Any questions?
No, not right now.
Okay. Let's take a quick look at chapter 23, which is a shorter chapter. And this is about creating a business plan. Creating a business plan is something that we do when we are looking at funding. I'm going to let you basically read through this chapter. It's not terribly long, but the purpose of a business plan is to understand how the organization, how the organization is structured, how you are going to generate revenue, and then what that means from a cash flow and balance sheet position. Business planning sounds kind of a lot, but the thing about business plans is that there's all sorts of software out there that can help you get through that whole process of constructing a business plan. So in the organization, basically how everything fits together. Are you a flat organization? Are you a hierarchical organization? Are you how many employees? What are the departmental structures, and so forth? So in the marketing, basically, how are you going to address the market? But the market needs to be, when you're doing a business plan, the market needs to be described very accurately. One of the biggest things in healthcare, if you look at Texas Oncology, we go back to last chapter, they're not talking about doing knee surgery. Their market segment includes only the business of treating and research in cancer and in dealing with patients. So their market is whatever that market is in terms of numbers of patients, the costs that are associated with actually treating and analyzing and working with patients. So your marketing is going to be, okay, how are we going to get enough patients into our system to be able to generate the revenues we need? And so the marketing can be a lot of different things. I'm not going to go into that. That's a different topic. Financial analysis, basically, again, you're doing a lot of forecasting, a lot of estimates. Your financial analysis will include a P&L. It'll include sources and uses statements. It will include a balance sheet because it has to show all of your depreciable equipment. And this will look different if you're looking at a business plan for a for-profit organization. It's going to be different than if you're looking at a not-for-profit because your audience for that business plan is going to be different. The not-for-profit, your organization is going, your audience is going to be various methods of funding that come from everything from public funds to private foundations. So your audience is different, and you need to understand the audience you're dealing with. So we'll have, You're going to start with a cash flow statement, and then you're going to go on to doing a balance sheet, income, and so forth, as well as where and a projection of where the money needs to come in, and an understanding of whether of the kind of capital expenses you plan to make. Again, we talked about that earlier. Income statement, obviously, we won't go into that too much. Assets and liabilities, you know about a balance sheet from your accounting classes. I don't need to go through this. The thing is that it has to be readable. It has to be clearly stated, and you don't have to make it so that the average Joe on the street can read it. But again, knowing who your target is tells you how much, tells you how you have to write it. We have this knowledgeable reader, meaning someone who's familiar enough with the business, and that's going to be different if you're talking about going to a series of venture capitalists or a series of foundations. There's always an executive summary. It says no more than 1 or 2 pages. If possible, keep it to 1. There is an unfortunate feeling that people who are doing this, and it has some validity to it, will only read 1 or 2 pages. And if you don't capture them in 1 or 2 pages, then they won't read the rest. The purpose of an executive summary is to make them want to read the rest. It's sort of like your cover letter that goes with your resume. The cover letter should make the person want to read that resume, because it should say, this is a person I want to really investigate hiring. And the executive summary, the problem with a business plan is that there's a lot of narrative to it, and then it's backed up by sometimes reams of paper with financial analyses and market analyses and all sorts of things. The executive summary basically is exactly that. It tells what you're after, it tells how much you need, and what you're going to do with it. That's basically that. Plan format, those are all different. You may be presenting this plan to a number of different people, including your own management. So you need to have a couple of different formats for this, including one that's more detailed and one that's more summary. And my bias is to basically, the summary is going to be, the short one is going to be the first part of the long one. It's sort of like the executive summary. It allows the people there to get hooked and want to learn more. Okay, so questions about any of that?
No, thanks. Not at this time.
Okay, let's go back and take a look at, that's what's on screen. Go back here.
So actually, yes, I do.
Okay.
So when you do your presentation, they'll bring you back more than once?
Sometimes they will. I've actually done presentations. Sometimes what will happen is that you will go, especially when I've dealt with venture capitalists, I'll go and make a presentation to one person in the venture capital organization. And then if they're interested, they'll call me back and have me present to their colleagues, the people who are actually going to be involved in making the decision of whether they're interested in funding. The same foundation, if you were looking to get money from a foundation or get support from a government body to have a contract for care, say, publicly financed, You may go before 2 or 3 people and then get called back to a larger group that has to really make the decision. So yeah, they'll call you back.
So would you want that presentation to be the same every time, or would you want it to be better every time?
Well, you want it to be better, but the thing is, if you get called back, one of the things you might want to do is say, okay, who am I presenting to, and how much detail do they want?
Okay.
And go in that way. And be always also be prepared if someone starts saying, well, I'd like to have more information on such and such. Have some extra stuff you can bring up that you might not put in, some of the details. As I say, a business plan can be, I mean, let's see, the last business plan I wrote was about 300 pages.
Oh, wow.
And 20 of it was narrative. The rest of it was tables and data to support. And so when I was making a presentation, I just basically was presenting the summary, the 20 pages. And if somebody said, well, can you give me some more details about this segment of the market? I could go in, pull it up, and have it available to do that. But yeah, what you don't want to do is go into a group that you also want to know is how much time do I have? Because if you've got a presentation that's going to take an hour and somebody says, well, we can give you about 15 minutes, you need to be able to cut that down real hard and let them extend it beyond the 15 minutes if they want to.
Okay.
But that's another aspect. Presentations are probably a topic we should teach. Because it can be quite complex to do this well. And I've done a lot of presentations, and I've made every single possible mistake you can make. So been through it, and it's quite a process. But yeah, you might get called back. In fact, you hope you do.
Right.
It's if you hope that the next time you hear from them, you'll get one of 2 messages: either come back, we want more, or yeah, we're going to write you a check.
Yeah.
But usually they won't. Usually it's going to be come back, we want more in depth. And then the other question is, if you're doing this and it's about your organization, you may want to say, where do they want more information, and should I bring one of my staff members who knows the topic better than me? Especially if you're talking about delivering medical care, you may have some people that want to hear how that's going to be done from the practitioners. And so there's a lot of things to consider and a lot of questions to ask if you're ever called back. That make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So let's go back here. All right. Oops. So are you going to be able to get week 2's assignment into me?
I'm gonna try to work on that today. I'm off today and tomorrow, but we're also moving tomorrow, so I'm gonna try to get as much done as I can today.
Okay, well then we'll end this quickly. So we have this week's discussion, which you've already seen, this week's assignment, and the assessment. Looking at the assignment right quick, sources of capital, and for profit and nonprofit, and where they might come from. But the pros and cons are, how steady are they? How reliable are they? And how well can you predict the cash flows? Okay, basically, I'll give you a little hint as to what they're after there. Now, if we go back, and the discussion is this week is about mission, and vision and value. statements, and where they fit into strategic planning. So we talked a lot about that just now. So
Yeah.
I'm going to take a look at the things that I've posted. So
Okay.
then we'll schedule another meeting for next Thursday
Okay.
and wrap things up. Next Thursday is the end of the month, so please get caught up as much as you can on this week's and last week's assignments, so that we can get through this class. Okay?
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else?
No, sir. Not today.
Okay, then we'll just end the meeting now, and I'll talk with you next week. And
All right.
I'm glad that you went ahead and watched the video from Tuesday. So
Good.
okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you
Next
later.
week.